Here is a presentation on Pale Blue Dot, Wanderers, an Introduction by Michael Olmsted on Carl Sagan. We were wanderers from the beginning. We changed from foragers to hunters. Individual life was supplanted by more successful group cooperation. The world was wild. We had to fend for ourselves or die from predators. We moved to fair climates. Everywhere was the frontier. We abandoned nomadic hunter-gatherer life for stationary agricultural life. This stationary life left us edgy, unfulfilled. Wandering is in our DNA. We are wanderers. The open road still softly calls. Sagan claims wandering may be for our own evolutionary benefits. We may have an increased likelihood of survival as wanderers over and above being stationary. Your own ancestral history might thus have been owed to a restless few, those who wandered. Sagan cites Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, who says wanderers have an everlasting itch for things remote. Greek and Roman mythology point to glorification of the adventurous. Just look at myths like the Odyssey or Jason and the Argonauts. The ancient Greeks and Romans only knew of the world as Europe and an attenuated Asia and Africa, all surrounded by an impassable world ocean. This understanding transformed into Asia and Africa being larger than anyone could have imagined. The world ocean was not impassable. Migration from Siberia to Alaska over the Bering Strait was allowed by the growth of the polar ice caps and a decrease in sea level, revealing a land bridge. We eventually made it to the Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire, at the southern tip of South America. There were a series of wanderings. The people of Borneo settled Madagascar. Egyptians and Libyans circumnavigated Africa. The Ming dynasty crossed the Indian Ocean, settled Zanzibar, rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and entered the Atlantic Ocean. America was colonized. We, anthropos, humanity, first evolved a few million years ago in East Africa. Since, we've discovered every earthly landmass, every continent, the remotest islands, from pole to pole, from Mount Everest to the Dead Sea, the bottom of the deepest oceans, and things up in the sky. Nonetheless, having seemingly exhaustively explored geographical space, we remain explorers at heart. Distant ancestors noticed the planets and stars wandering in the sky, specifically 5 of them. They had curious and complex motion. Slowly they wandered, and some made loops. We call them planets, which is Greek for wanderers. Sagan imagines that our wandering ancestors could relate to this wandering. Sagan says the planets are gravitationally lashed to the sun. This wording and phraseology reminds me of Nietzsche's comment on the effect of God's death on human morality, that we, by killing God, unchained this earth from the sun, unchained us from God. Morality, prior to the death of God, was based on God. Things were morally right, not because of their inherent moral rightness, but because God said they were right. Nietzsche's death of God resulted in God no longer being the center of our moral universe. God was no longer the basis for human morality. This left us alone in the universe, and with a method like Kant's, we had reason to found our moralities universally. Things became culturally right or wrong based on our judgment using reason. Reason gave us access to the infinite, the necessary abstract logical forms of correct human behavior. Using human reason, we find the center point of our moral worlds to be moved from being the sun and God to being the universal and infinite. We, the earth, no longer need God, the sun, to be moral. The earth now may access the moral forms through reason, a method it had discovered itself. It had become morally self-sufficient. Carrying this analogy further, the planets are still actually sun-centered, lashed to the sun, as were our evolutionary ancestors. So, perhaps, the planets, as lesser gods, given they were named after gods, are, and our human ancestors were, in need of a Kantian revolution that would universalize their moral viewpoint. They, the planet gods, and our ancestors need their morality to be universalized through reason to allow them to live in a world post-God and post-Helios, to live in a universe at large. This brings me to my next point. Future humanity is represented in a story framework like Star Trek. This humanity no longer needs gods nor the sun to live morally. With reason, they have accessed universal morality. Given their moral behavior, they have become well organized enough to harness nature with technology to become gods themselves, like suns in their own right. We now recognize the planets and the rest of the universe as a new frontier to be explored. As they say in Star Trek, space is the final frontier. Although I disagree that space is the final frontier, because there are other infinite spaces to be explored. For example, the space of ideas is an infinite space, as well as spaces such as consciousness, technology, media, and entertainment, and human culture, although these may not be mutually exclusive categories. This frontier, space, is a new world ocean. As the world ocean was to Greeks and Romans, space is to us. Sagan says this space is no more impassable than the last, referring to the once thought impassable world ocean. Sagan, being an astronomer cosmologist, is strongly biased towards seeing space colonization as easy and inevitable. The opposite is the case. Elon Musk estimates that a trip to Mars for colonization would cost $10 billion per person. Not exactly passable. This being the case, there may still be an analogy to be made between the once seeming impassability of the world ocean to that of space, both of which, through time, biological evolution, and technological development, became and may become passable, explorable, and explored, or at least being explored. Here is a compilation of US and Soviet space exploration highlights. Humanity has flown by, orbited, or landed on 70 new worlds. We have wandered among the wanderers. We have found vast volcanic evidences, ancient river valleys, a giant planet with interior liquid hydrogen, whole melted moons, atmospheres of corrosive acids, faithful records of the violent formation of the solar system, ice worlds, patterned ring systems alluding to the effect of gravitation, and worlds of complex organic molecules. Sadly, every one of these new worlds is desolate and barren. There are no better places than Earth, so far at least. In 1994, at the time of writing Pale Blue Dot, Sagan said that not even the richest among us Earthlings can afford bodily space travel. Now, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are planning the colonization of space. Jeff Bezos is doing so because he sees Earth as having insufficient energy resources for long-term human life, and he has a desire to keep human civilization growing and dynamic rather than in stasis. Elon Musk wants to make Mars a backup drive for humanity in case of the complete demise of earthly civilization. Despite the title of this book being Pale Blue Dot, referencing the image of Earth from the Voyager spacecraft in 1990, taken from a location outside our solar system, Sagan posits towards the end of the introduction that our world and species are unique, and even central to the workings and purpose of the cosmos. Although this is a strange statement from a scientist, I can relate. We may think the universe is wide and vast, with many universes in a multiverse, galaxies in a given universe, solar systems in galaxies, and many planets within those. But we have a possibility that our lives are actually not a result of the scientific and evidence-based story proposed by science. Rather, our world is of intelligence, made by intelligence, for intelligence, human, non-human, God, or otherwise. This is my own thought. Sagan may be thinking along these same lines as well, despite being deeply science-based like myself, and that scientific story allows for a mode of life that is optimal for those livers, but is not necessarily the truth, despite being well-founded in reason and evidence. Ultimately, we should use our own personal lives' evidence to form our own theories. As I leave you now, I may say, the open road still softly calls. Those other worlds beckon.